Hey everybody, I'm Jody Vance.
And I'm George-Affleck.
And it's time for...
Because I'm free to do what I want any old time. Yeah, I'm free! UnSpun.
We're going to get to one kind of free before we get to another kind of free. We're going to get to COVID restrictions being lifted. And Christian, but let's do perfect segue into what is happening with the trucker convoy. I kind of refuse to call it a freedom convoy. I think it's become so muddied now, and there's so many arms to this, whether it's at border crossings or what have you. It's like, what a waste of resources that we don't have right now to have roadblocks at the truck crossing in Surrey. Like, it makes me just like, anyway, how do you feel about the emergency act that Justin Trudeau's Liberals decided was necessary in order to clear out Ottawa and clear these border crossings?
I am not comfortable with it. I do not think it's a good idea. It's a bad look. I don't think it was necessary. I think because we're British Columbians, we're so used to these kinds of things happening here because of our forestry industry and all the tent cities and we've kind of learned how to get rid of people who tend to want to protest for months on end. And there is process. There's a process for this, and I feel like this is not the process that we need. And it's concerning from the power that it gives him. Even though he says, "Oh, I'm not going to get that power," it does give him power.
I look at it as like, did we really need to go to that nuclear lever politically in order to do what is happening now, which is basically utilizing bylaws? And, did you really need an emergency act to compel tow truck drivers to tow the trucks? Because I feel like there was a different avenue that might have been, maybe I'm wrong because I don't know all the details on whether or not you could, freeze the bank accounts of people that are there or turn off their insurance or take away their trucking license and all those things. I found fascinating. When the Prime Minister made the announcement, I listened to that. And then when Chrystia Freeland stepped forward as Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, and what she said actually was what hit with me. It's like, we are writing down your license plate numbers and we are going to give consequences to those companies that are breaking the law. But can't you do that anyway? Like, do you need the,
Yes.
I don't, right? Like, and that's where it goes in my mind.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I think, what's interesting is the provincial responses to this decision and how BC was kind of like, meh, other provinces, Alberta, and everybody else sort of the central part of the country was like, how dare you? I mean, it's really interesting how, I don't know, like it's trying to figure out and I think it's, again, here in BC, we're kind of like, meh. And we're also used to it. But I think if you live somewhere else and you haven't experienced this kind of behavior before on a regular basis like we have here, it becomes a real issue. But I do think it's a dangerous precedent. It's never been used like this before. The War Measures Act, all that kind of stuff. This is something that's unprecedented, and I think
because this act, the Emergency Act, is what the War Act used to be.
Yeah,
and it evolved into this. So, Trudeau dad and Trudeau's son have been the two to enact this, as you mentioned in last week's podcast, that part of this. It's perhaps, and I don't know if this is the spin on it, why it needs to be as politicized as it is, because it's happening on the doorstep of Parliament, because it's happening in the nation's capital, because it's 3 weeks and counting for people in Ottawa. And that there needed to be some big magnanimous. I don't know. I don't know the answer to it, but that's my unspun vibe.
No. I think the capital thing puts you on edge because of what happened in Washington, D.C. I think we're on edge about that. We don't want to see what happened on January 6th. That kind of, there's that impulse. Oh my God, are we going to see what happened in D.C. happen in Ottawa? So there's that. But there's also the funding that they're getting from the U.S., which is very, questionable about, where this, is it 52%, 55%? I know that John Woodward, who's moved to Ontario now, has been covering this, who used to report for CTV here, and he's kind of touching on this a lot on the data, because he's a data guy.
It's fascinating. It's
and so
fascinating.
the decision by the Freeland basically now, and this decision by to clamp down on the cryptocurrency companies to say you're not allowed to work with these guys and give them their money. And it's all very like there are two or three different stories going on here that we don't even understand. I think there's the whole protest that it built came from where we want our freedom, enough of these regulations, we want to cross the border without vaccinations. You know, you go, well, we're so close. We're so close to the end of this, aren't we? I mean,
Yeah.
God forbid we should have another wave, and we can't predict the future and all that stuff. But it feels like we're close. Feels like we are in Canada. So why would you want to go? And so that protest, is there something? Are there two other or three other narratives going on that are, beyond the basic issue? And I think there are, and I think they're being funded. And I think what I find interesting, I brought this up last week, and I keep seeing this, and I'm trying to find out, this whole issue of the funding in Americans and the people who are out there screaming and yelling about how bad it is. I brought this up. It just drives me crazy. How dare they get American funding, and controlling by American funders are the same people who, all these organizations like the David Suzuki Foundation and all these organizations that Alberta was complaining about. And then they were saying, well, no, that money doesn't affect our decision making. What are you talking about? It's the same people. I mean, you can't have it both ways. What is it, having your cake and eat it too? I mean, you can't. It doesn't work that way. Either it does control your agenda or doesn't. And I think that's a question we have to continue to ask ourselves and look at each scenario differently. But to get so much money for something that doesn't really need that much money makes you scratch your head. What is a long-term game plan here with these millions and millions and millions of dollars they're getting that they may not be able to access some of it now? That is what you need to start thinking about. And I think that's kind of where Trudeau's coming through a little bit about this. It gives him the ability to kind of access stuff that he wouldn't be able to access. When 9/11 happened, and this wasn't even brought in 9/11, we were apprehensive. We changed some regulations in Canada, but we didn't do as much as they did in the States. For example, we have a lot of, I think I brought this up before, servers in Canada. A lot of servers for corporate, American companies are based in Canada. Because Americans aren't allowed to access the servers to look at corporate documents. But in America, they can, because since 9/11, they changed the regulations and said that they needed to access this information for the safety of the Americans. And they never, of course, never reversed that decision. They never do. That's the problem. When you bring in these things and you change things, and the opportunity to, and we've seen that in BC. I mean, the FOI regulations, all these stuff that they've pushed through the legislature here in BC that you kind of have not even noticed. The FOI being the biggest one, which you've heard a bit about this week because of the minister responsible getting slapped. But I'm jumping
before
ahead.
we go too far.
Don't go. I'm just saying
I'm gonna rein you all the way back, if I may. Wait, we're gonna get to all of that, but let's go all the way back to American donors, to the trucker convoy.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, and we have not discussed this prior to you, and I'm fascinated to learn what you think about this, because we had reaction to the list of donors in being leaked, right? So everybody now knows who donated to this cause, and there's some people who getting like gaslit for donating. There's one woman in the US who got reported on, I think it was, I'm not sure the publication, but a newspaper, who pointed to this business owner, and she had donated $250. And she was even quoted in the story as saying, I donated early on before I knew that there was all or whatever. But then AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, chimed in and said, why would this paper name this person? This is wrong. And then I think it was Ted Cruz or Ron DeSantis, one of those people who would never agree with AOC, like retweeted her and said, I kind of agree with this. And then Soledad O'Brien, who used to be an anchor at CNN, retweeted both of them and said, I disagree with you people. And then I looked through some social media. Once you're going down that rabbit hole, right, the algorithm sends you more. And I saw somebody that was like listing every name and where they worked and stuff. And I just thought, on one hand, I'm trying to think of a donation that I have ever made in my life. And I typically donate anonymously because I just don't like my name on a scroll somewhere. However, if my name were to come to light as a donor, I would say probably 100% of the time I'd be proud of what I donated my money to, because it aligns with how I think, how I feel, and with the change. Typically it's a charity though, but who's donating to something that they would be embarrassed about? So I wonder from your perspective, how do you feel about the quote unquote leaking or outing of people who have donated to this particular cause.
Well, it's horrible. I mean, I think it's really bad. And who did this and how did that happen makes you wonder about and the goals of that who, it's very curious. It makes people apprehensive maybe for donating to anything in the future if that kind of stuff can get out. And that's really bad for nonprofits. Although I saw a lot of people joking about this too, going, oh, awesome. I'll take that list and go after that in cash myself. Nice to have a lead list for your donations for your organization, and if they align with your agenda, then great. And I think, yeah, I
See,
agree
you
that you
always
have
got some good unspun to bring to the table, Mr. Curve Communications.
but I agree with you. I think you need to stand by your donation. If and okay, sure, it's a morphed. This event, this thing has morphed into something maybe that you didn't. But this person's comment that you mentioned, that's kind of what you have to say. Hey, you stand by what you get. I gave money to this organization when I thought it was valid, and I'm embarrassed of what it's become. At least they're clear. But yeah, to be gaslit and to be dragged through
Or
the
doxed, I guess is
mud,
what you call it when you put somebody's name out there and you get,
and then to
call in the mob to come at them.
yeah,
Let's move along to the one more thing I wanted to talk about was the Candice Bergen, the interim leader of the Conservative Party, one of her high up fellow members
staffers.
appeared,
Yeah.
appeared on Laura Ingram's Fox News, and it was like trending yesterday. I'm wondering what the fascination. I mean, I get why Fox News is jumping on Canada, but I mean, if Canadian politicians are looking for a way to not appear far right and you know
Mm.
and really rooted in truth, do you go on Fox? Like I'm and there are people who love watching Fox News, and I get it. I watch all the cable news in the United States. I think all of them are slanted in their own way and in an unhealthy way. And in Canada, I like that we have journalistic standards that are different than that. Like, I think Canada would be better if we
For
just
now,
didn't have those.
although we talked about last week about what the future of a certain DJ in the city is.
Yeah.
I think there is a movement out there, and maybe a lot of that money that's being raised might go towards funding some alternative media in this country that might be perceived as alt right. I think it's funny. I always, watch Bill Maher on Friday nights
Yeah.
on HBO, and he's always telling people to go on HBO from his side of the spectrum. He's a libertarian, but you'd probably consider him a Democrat. To go on Fox as much as possible. But I think if you're a Canadian conservative, and you want to be seen as progressive in some form, our perception of conservativeness in this country is quite different than America. However, we see Pierre Poilievre as the lead by far. So far, it's kind of like Kevin Falcon for the BC Liberals here right now for the federal Conservatives. Doesn't look like he can be beat at this point. I would say, although the Conservatives are say go home, it appears to be willing to take a shift to the right, to the alt-right, in a scary way. And I think, unfortunately, I think Trudeau's feeding into that and putting gasoline on that fire by what he's doing. He's this divide and conquer mentality, which we've seen in Vancouver for a long time. I certainly got positioned as some kind of right wing person, which I'm like a business person. I care about money. I've
You're not
never been
right
a
wing.
member of the Conservative Party.
No.
I'm not I don't even, I would say I'm closer to libertarian than anything else because I don't like government and I want to save money and I do what you promise and but I got positioned and I saw that kind of thing happening here in Vancouver. It's been going on for a long time in Vancouver, and you see it happening in other provinces, and now we're seeing it's surprising. And actually, on Bill Maher, one of his guests was like, when he quoted some of the things that Trudeau said in the last week, she was like, "What?" And she's a hardcore Democrat. She ran for president. I forget her name. Sorry, and she was like, "What? That's Trudeau?"
Was it Tulsi Gabbard who
Yeah,
was
I
on
think it
there?
was.
Oh,
I
okay.
think it was.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Which she always surprises me that she's a Democrat because
yeah,
when I see her speak, I feel like it was almost like she was a bit of a Trojan horse
yeah, and I
being a
think that
Democrat. But she
yeah,
served in the army, and she's got her background of believing the way things should be managed in the United States. And I found it fascinating watching her along that journey of trying to become the candidate for the Democrats. But I want to get to
We've
before we
missed,
get too
we've this divisiveness is dangerous, and we've
yeah.
seen it what's happened in America, and Trudeau is now feeding into it. Pierre Poilievre likely will, given his style. This is not what we want in Canada.
Let's jump forward so that we can get into the other divisiveness, which is the behind the story of the freedom mandate convoy trucker blockade protest bouncy castle fest. Let's move into what happened here in British Columbia with regard to COVID restrictions being lifted. I think that was a landmark day this week to basically hear and check to see if I heard what you heard. It's not over. It's not over. But British Columbia is one of the highest vaccinated places on the planet. Mm-hmm. And we are now in a position where our healthcare system is not being crushed. Mm-hmm. We have enough community immunity for the next while, barring whatever might come, as you said before. We don't know what a new next variant might look like. But for the next while, we can all now be trusted to use all of those lessons that we have been hit over the head with for 2 solid years. Wash your hands, stay home when you're sick, cover your mouth, if you're coughing, all of those things. If you are high risk, don't mix and mingle in big groups, stay outside if you can, you have to assess your own personal risk. I got really excited at the idea and the concept that the measures that we have been under, that closed bars and nightclubs and gyms and, the no dancing and no mingling, and you can't have a dinner party and all of the things that we have missed so much. Like you can have a wedding, you can have a funeral. Oh my God. It's just like
I'll be at a concert tonight for my son, his band, Farhaven at UBC. They had scheduled a long time ago, timing just perfect. Awesome. So live concert.
I'm going to go to 5440 at the Commodore. I'm going to dance my ass off, but I'm still a month or so away from that. Yeah.
So shout out to Farhaven, my son's band. Farhaven, everyone. Just go download Farhaven's the theme song to our podcast done by my son. Not Farhaven, but his band is pretty amazing. And it was I'm going to that tonight. Good. This is but Amanda doesn't want to go. She's like, it's a bit crowded for me.
Yeah.
So fair. Risk, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's
even there though, George, important to note there, with Amanda saying it's a bit too crowded for me, you going and coming home is kind of the same as her going, but she just doesn't want to be in a room full of people like that yet. And I think we all have to look at one another, and this is why I use divisiveness to get into it, because there are people that are going to be like, take off your mask. You know what? No, I don't. If I want to wear my mask, maybe I didn't put my lipstick on today. Maybe I just wanted to, maybe I want to be incognito. Maybe I've got, ball cap, ponytail, sunglasses, mask, boom. Never on TV a day in my life when I walk around like that, as long as I don't talk.
Would you ever go to a doctor's office or a hospital or anything again without wearing a mask? I don't know. I don't know. I go to my doctor's office and I'm like, probably should have been. I've always been a bit of a germ freak and touching things and door handles and with my elbows and flushing toilets with my feet and lifting toilets. Yeah. I've always been like that.
Me too.
And people would mock me.
I get the napkin and open the bathroom door and then throw it in the garbage can.
Yeah, I'm not a germ freak, but I think that I know that the basic contamination that you can get, what you can catch.
Yeah, you're not running your hand down the railing at the shopping mall.
Or my tongue, taking gum off the railing in New York, like Elf.
No.
Although my son did do that when he was 2. He found a piece of gum. And I was like, "What are you chewing?" We're at science, going into science world. I said, he was like 2 or 3, and I said, "What are you chewing? Gum?" I'm like, "Where did you get gum?" It's just right there. I'm like, it was snowing out. I'm like, oh.
I would have thrown up. I would have barfed right on the spot. Hey, but I got to tell you, I did think of you in the moment when the travel restrictions changed, when the PCR test was removed and now it's an antigen test, and that if you get pulled aside for the random test and you happen to test positive, you don't need to quarantine. You're not like mandatory. You're not like, all of these things. I was like, wow. And that they've removed the warning against non-essential travel for a rule follower like me.
Yes.
I feel really good about that now. I'm allowed to travel now. And that's not that I looked at other people and said, you shouldn't be traveling. It's for me. I'm a rule follower in that regard. And so I feel like I've got my freedom back.
Yes, it's great. It's not quite like Coachella, which has got, have you seen it? It's like full on, no mask. Like, no. They're just allowing us to get like normal times. So we'll see. But will we still see these super spreaders, or do we even track it anymore? I think it is. It's just a matter of us getting used to the concept of being traveling and about being in crowded areas. And yeah, you're right. And so it kind of goes back to this, oh my God, can't we just calm down, everybody? Why do we have
Yeah.
to be all, we've gotten this far, 2 years exactly.
2 years.
We're like, let's move on and be happy. We should be
Yeah.
celebrating at this point. Remember that commercial that came out about a year and a half ago? And then it was like clearly premature. It's a gum commercial, and everybody comes out of their houses and they've been in there and they're dancing around and hugging each other. And that's what it should be like. We should be doing
Yeah.
that right now, not fighting. We should be
It
hugging
should
each
be
other
like
going,
it should be like
hooray!
it should be SARS Fest. What we really need are the Rolling Stones. We need the Rolling Stones to be just
Yes.
outside of Ottawa, and they need to do a massive outdoor concert.
Yeah.
What was it? It was this because I attended SARS Fest. That was the big end of SARS in Ontario after being terrified for too
Right.
long.
Yeah, Ontario is
Not 2
definitely
years,
different
but
than here. Because I was in
it
Ontario
was
for a brief, and it was crazy because we came from here and we got there. I'm like, what's going on
it
here?
was nuts. But it was coming for young people. Like it
Yeah.
was terrifying, and it was spreading in a way that was just like, holy moly. But that was like they literally, I think I told you this before on this podcast that nobody would go out. Everybody was so still scared to go out, and they're like, free beer. Come downtown. You come
Oh,
every
I was
bar,
there.
free
We
beer,
were at
free
an
beer
event,
for
but
everybody.
nobody showed
And
up, but we had
and
free
nobody
beer.
showed up. And then the Rolling
Hmm.
Stones came with AC/DC and Justin Timberlake, and who else was there? And it was just like the best concert. And it was like 120,000 people showed up at this airport just outside of the city. And it was like the craziest thing because you know how parking for an event can be like a lot of people flipping
Right?
people off and fighting for parking spots.
Yeah.
No, everybody's like, high
It
five,
was
high five.
all
No, 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 you go. No, you. I'm like,
it's like the Olympics, in
yeah,
2010.
yes, yes. I wish we could have that vibe. I really do.
I know we
Let's go
should.
to,
Why is it
I
being
know.
ruined?
It's
Meh.
being ruined. Come on, everybody, just go home. Can't we just kumbaya for a second? Then we can get back to fighting because we got a municipal election to get to, and there's some hot topics on that to get to
Oh
here.
God.
What is happening, George?
Well, if I was mayor, I wouldn't be spending all my money on advertising to say what I'm going to do different, like this mayor. John Cooper rightly called out the mayor. He's spending money on ads. The mayor's office is spending money on ads in an election year. So I'm pretty sure he's breaking the rules for the Elections BC regulations for campaign finance and how this works. As of January 1st, there are a lot of restrictions that you got to follow. You got to be very careful. And, I think that the mayor in Vancouver doing ads paid for by the taxpayers of the city is not on. But the good news is he's saying he's going to deal with the whole crime thing and really empower the police. And aren't you the guy that was like, anti-police about 3 months ago? I mean, it's like the wind.
I know you mentioned John Cooper, but just so that I also saw Ken Sim on Global Morning News talking about this as well and reiterating what I think is actually a solid point. Like we need to get public money and union money and out of our elections. Like it's just, I mean, I
Well,
get
they
it,
are. It is. I don't know what he's
but
talking about. It is because you're.
our
No,
public
it's
money
not.
was just spent on it.
Well, yeah, but
And when you
that's
pointed
why
out
I think it breaks the rules. The
But you pointed
1,200
out,
bucks
hold
is
on, hold on,
the
hold on, hold
yeah.
on, hold on, hold on, hold on. I need you to unspin this for me. I don't want to argue
All
with
right.
you about it because you obviously know this better than I do. But perception, while it didn't have union cash in the last municipal election, I saw a lot of union employees with a certain color of sign standing on street corners leading on the up to voting day. And it was like, did all those people just get the day off? Or is this part
Yeah,
of their work day? Is that not a way of using
100%.
money
So
and
two things that
influence? Like, is that gone
absolutely.
now? Is that gone now?
They've tightened up that rule on the staffing thing, and that they have actually dealt with a little bit of that. So the unions don't have
Good.
as much freedom, but they are because they are required to report any staffing time
Okay.
used that you donate, and that is required. What they never did do, which I always argued, was and Ken Sim, who claimed he was raising millions of dollars over the last couple of years, and if he did, he had to have that spent by December 31st. So I'd be curious to know how Ken Sim's cash flow is right now because he had to have spent that money that he
From
raised
before.
prior. Yes.
Right.
Or if it
Right.
get, where did he get it from? We're not required to provide any details on that. So my argument always was, Vision was fundraising all the time. They were party in power, especially if you're in power. You can get way more money, when you have all this influence and ability to talk to people. But it was never required, and it still isn't. About the money you raise between elections, not the year of elections, is what I find very, very curious. And so Ken Sim says he raised hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Where did you spend that money? Who gave you that money? I want to know that. Not required. Same with
And
Kennedy-Stewart, raised tons of money.
if you were
I
mayor,
would be transparent. I think you just keep that money.
exactly.
Literally, if you have a political party, it should be logged. There's where the money is coming from. Obviously, the individuals. It goes back to that question we were talking about earlier about privacy. That's a lot of the people's concern, because it has to be individual donors now,
Right.
whether it's a political party or an individual. And I just think that the laws are specifically they're restrictive, and I think the better question to ask is, should we just not allow financing at all, fundraising? And maybe there's a bit of this now provincially, where you get money from the province to pay for the elections campaign. Everybody gets the same amount of money based on certain criteria. It's taxpayers' money, but it stops this whole game of who can raise the most money and spend the most money. Hey, I own a
Right.
marketing company. I've worked on campaigns. Money is very effective in winning election campaigns. So
Right.
if you take the money out, that's one way to deal with it. But I don't see any party in power ever doing that completely.
Saying, how do we take all the money out of what we could do here? Because you just stated that the party in power often has the easiest path to fundraising.
Yes.
It is, and you mentioned FOI earlier, and that's what
Mm-hmm.
you were referencing here, is the freedom of information piece of this puzzle. Is when you want that transparency, oftentimes you need to go through a million miles of red tape, which now costs more to
More,
do.
yeah. Yeah. So if I want to know, were the
Affordability,
people who tore Gassy Jack down, or
right. That was really quite something. What would you, if you were mayor, how would you have reacted to that?
I would have done my research, that's for sure. I knew that, and I think, I tweeted this out. I can't remember if I did tweet it out. I remember bringing it up, but I thought, I don't know about this, because Gassy Jack, if you Googled him, you'd know that he'd married this First Nations kid back in the day, and
12
it's yeah.
from Squamish.
So, right. So there's this, but the mayor talked about, hey, we were in this process. Well, the actual process wasn't about Gassy Jack. It was about emblems and stuff in our city in general. That was a report. They were waiting for that report back. That was now 2 years ago that they submitted that. So you get the frustration. Like, what are you doing? Take these statues down that we don't like. This whole statue down in history is a whole other debate. There's ways to say, okay, Gassy Jack was this kind of guy. This place is called Gastown because of him, but wow, he did this and this and this, and now we've changed. There's ways you can educate people. We're tearing all these things down, as you hear all the time. Are we erasing the history now? So we don't need to know about who Gassy Jack was and how in those days you
I would
married
take,
12
for
year
me, I would take the
olds?
symbol down. I would take his likeness down, because that's a piece of truth and reconciliation,
Then what
right?
about
So,
Gastown?
but
Can
Gastown
rename it then.
there can be a plaque. There's middle ground here. Here we go, middle. And
Mm,
take that statue, all covered in its orange paint or red paint now, and put it in a museum and put a plaque there that said it used to stand here. It's just, it doesn't need to be this
Lawlessness is the
difficult.
issue. Lawlessness,
Right. No,
though,
I
is
get you.
so
I get you. I'm
rampant.
just going to finish my point, though, because I think
Yes,
it's really important to understand that we, as entitled white colonizers, cannot possibly understand what this symbol means to a huge swath of our community that right now is dealing with epic levels of trauma
sure.
and generational trauma and being marginalized to the degree of, it's just, I mean, we could do an entire series of podcasts on that. And I know the woman who is one of the organizers of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Walk, which is what this day was that the statue was
Yeah,
pulled down. Kelly White is her name, and she's unbelievable. She's amazing. She is such an activist, a motivator. She walks the walk. She does the work. She is downtown East Side caring for the people. and really a touchstone for so many. And I had the opportunity to interview her for Al Jazeera English, and I since have followed her and become connected to her. So I follow along on what she does and help her where I can with amplifying her voice and lending myself to her voice. And one of the things I saw after the statue came down was Kelly's reaction to it. And it was, she was so upset that statue was pulled down on what was supposed to be all about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and honoring them. It's a prayer session. It is elders. And no elder would ever want any act like that to happen during one of their events. And I think that's something that's been lost because for you and I, looking at that, I mean, I can say I would take it down. But I can also see a whole bunch of other, symbols of, we talked about the barge Chillin Beach or whatever that got tagged with, the First Nations Indigenous name of that area and how that, brings to light what we're doing and how we can, there's a huge conversation around that. I think Gassy Jack has been a symbol of pedophilia and attacking First Nations in this community in a way that statue should have been dealt with before, whatever it was, 569 days before or whatever.
Yes, but you might want to do some Googling on George Vancouver and
for sure.
Cook and
for sure.
Stanley.
No, there are others.
No,
right.
it's going to be a real question about the future of our city, even the name of our city.
We can't what about those all the way into not taking action on something that is standing in and has been an issue that the First Nations people, it's like for the mayor to put out a response to that saying, I think he said he was disappointed and whatever. It's like,
Well, I think that it sounds like they wanted to have almost like a funeral-like process, a ceremonial process of removal, which it sounds like that's what you're describing. Once the decision was made to remove it through the process that they were leading, the Squamish Nation, and I think they wanted to. There was also that kind of closure now that's taken away from them by this, this kind of ripping down the thing. Now it's the only good thing is that most people didn't know about the history of Gassy Jack, really. I think that these are the questions that we're going to have to continue to address. And I think, we say we don't want to be, leave the name Gastown, leave the name Vancouver, leave the name Stanley Park. These are questions that this council and government is going to have to deal with, and how far do you go is the ultimate question, because the history that we have is complicated, and we have to.
I like what we've done on the Sea to Sky Highway, personally. I like what we've done on the Sea to Sky Highway. I like that there's the names of more in both languages, because the language is what's being lost as well. So I think if we, as a society, and it was a very Gord Downey thing, he's like, we need to be allies and understand that together we heal, but it's going to take a long time. But drawing out the red tape process is not, in my opinion, the way to go in my UnSpun. Right. And on that, we're out of time.
I know. Overtime. We're going to get in trouble.
George
_
Affleck on Twitter, at Jody Vance on Twitter, Jody with a Y on Twitter, the Orca. Of course, you're going to sign up for the Fin. The Orca.ca is where you go. Lots of great articles up there right now. Mine's on affordability. I just decided
we didn't even get into that.
No. We'll talk about that next week. Next week.
Yes.
Next week. Okay. Bye, George.
Bye.